Chapter 25. That year we had a cold spell in each winter month. Then when the first warm day of spring finally arrived in April, the trees and flowers and grasses burst to life with such intensity that the television shows had to proclaim an allergy emergency. The drugstores literally ran out of allergy medicine. But while the rest of the world was focused on the inconvenience of hay fever, the people in my world had other things to do. Eve continued with the unstoppable process of dying. Zoe spent too much time with her grandparents, and Denny and I worked trying to ease the pain we felt in our hearts. Still, Denny allowed for an occasional diversion, and that April one presented itself. He had gotten a job offer from one of the racing schools he worked for. They had been hired to provide race car drivers for a television commercial, and they asked Denny to be one of the drivers. The race course was in California, a place called Thunder Hill Raceway Park. I knew it was happening in April because Denny talked about it quite a bit. He was very excited, but I had no idea that he planned to drive himself there, a 10-hour trip. And I had even less of an idea that he planned on taking me with him. Oh, the joy. Denny and me in our BMW, driving all the way and into the evening like a couple of banditos running from the law. Like partners in crime, it had to be a crime to lead such a life as we led, a life in which one could escape one's trouble by racing cars. The drive down wasn't very special. The middle of Oregon is not noted for its scenic beauty, though other parts of Oregon are. And the mountain passes in Northern California were still somewhat snowy, which made me less nervous. Luckily, the snow of the Siskiyous was confined to the shoulders of the highway, and the road surface was bare and wet, and then we fell out of the sky and into the green fields north of Sacramento. The track was relatively new and well cared for. It was challenging with twists and elevation changes and so much to look for. That morning after we arrived, Denny took me jogging. We jogged the entire track. He was doing it to familiarize himself with the surface. You can't really see a track from inside a race car traveling at 150 miles per hour or more, he said. You have to get out and feel it. Denny explained to me what he was looking for, bumps in the pavement that might upset one's suspension. He touched the pavement at the midpoint of the turns and felt the condition of the asphalt. Were the small stones worn smooth? Could he find better grip slightly on the establishing racing line? And there were the tricks of the slope in certain turns, places where the track appeared level from inside a car but were actually graded ever so slightly to allow rainwater to run off the track and not puddle dangerously. After we traveled the entire track, we returned to the paddock, the infield of the track, where the cars get worked on. 2 large trucks had arrived. Several men in racing crew uniforms erected tents and canopies and laid out an elaborate food service. Other men unloaded 6 beautifully identical Aston Martin DB5 automobiles, the kind made famous by James Bond. Denny introduced himself to a man who carried a clipboard and walked with the gait of someone in charge. His name was Ken. "Thanks for your dedication," Ken said, "but you're early." "I wanted to walk the track." "It's too early for race engines," he said, "but you can take your streetcar out if you want. Just keep it sane." "Thanks," Denny said, and he looked at me and winked. We went over to a crew truck, and Denny caught the arm of a crew member. "I'm Denny, one of the drivers." The man shook his hand and introduced himself as Pat. "I'm going to take my BMW out for a few easy laps." Ken said it was okay. "I was wondering if you had a tie-down I could borrow." "What do you need a tie-down for?" Denny glanced at me quickly, and Pat laughed. "Hey, Jim," he called to another man, "this guy wants to borrow a tie-down so he can take his dog for a joyride." They both laughed, and I was a little confused. "I have something better," the Jim guy said. He went around the cab of the truck and returned a minute later with a bed sheet. Denny told me to get in the front seat of his car and sit, which I did. They wrapped the sheet over me, pressing me to the seat, leaving only my head sticking out. They somehow secured the sheet tightly from behind. "Too tight?" Denny asked. I was too excited to reply. He was going to take me out in his car. "Take it easy on him until you see if he has a stomach for it." "You've done this before?" asked Denny. "Oh, yeah. My dog used to love it." Denny walked around the driver's side. He took his helmet out of the back seat and squeezed it onto his head. He got into the car and put on his seatbelt. 1 bark means slower, 2 means faster. Got it? I barked twice, and that surprised him, Pat, and Jim, who were both leaning into the passenger window. "He wants to go faster already. You've got yourself a good dog there." The paddock at Thunder Hill Raceway Park is tucked between 2 long parallel straights. The rest of the course fans out from the paddock area like butterfly wings. We cruised very slowly through the hot pit area and to the track entrance. "We're going to take it easy," Denny said, and off we went. Being on a track was a new experience for me. No buildings, no signs, no sense of proportion. It was like running through a field, gliding over a plain. Denny shifted smoothly, and I noticed he drove more aggressively than he did on the street. He revved the car much higher, and his braking was much harder. Around the turns we went. Down the streets we picked up speed. We weren't going very fast, maybe 60, but I really felt the speed around the arms when the tires made a hollow, ghostly sound, almost like an owl. I felt special, being with Denny on the racetrack. He had never taken me on a track before. I felt sure and relaxed. Being held firmly to the seat was comforting. The windows were open and the wind was fresh and cold. I could have driven like that all day. After 3 laps, he looked over at me. "You want to try a hot lap?" "A hot lap?" I barked twice. And then I barked twice again. Denny laughed. "Sing out if you don't like it." One long howl. He firmly pressed the accelerator on the floor. There is nothing like it. The sensation of speed, nothing in the world can compare. "Hold on now," Denny said. "We're taking this at speed." Fast we went, hurtling, faster. I watched the turn approach, screaming at us until we were practically past it, and then he was off the accelerator and hard on the brakes. And then he cranked the wheel left, and he was back on the gas, and we were pushing through the turn. The force of gravity shoving us toward the outside of the car, but the tires holding us in place. They were not hooting. Those tires, no. The owl was dead. The tires were screeching. They were shouting, howling, crying in pain. He relaxed on the wheel, and at the midpoint in the car, drifted toward the exit, and he was full on the gas, and we flew out of that turn and turned the next and the next after that. 15 turns, 15. I love them all equally. I adore them all. Each one is different, each one with its own particular sensation, but each so magnificent. Around the track we went, faster and faster, lap after lap. "You okay?" he asked, looking over at me as we sped at nearly 120 miles per hour. I barked twice. "I'm going to use up my tires if you keep me out here. One more lap." Yes, one more lap. I live my life for one more lap. I give my life for one more lap. Please, God, give me one more lap. But that lap was spectacular. I lifted my eyes as Denny instructed. "Big eyes, far eyes," he said to me. Those reference points he had identified when we walked through the track moved by so quickly, it took me some time to realize he was not even seeing them. He was living them. He had programmed the map of the racecourse into his brain, and it was there like a GPS navigational system when we slowed for a turn. His head was up and looked at the next turn, not at the turn we were driving, but his attention and his intention were far ahead to the next turn and the one beyond that. With every breath he adjusted, he corrected, and he did it all instinctively. I saw then how in a race he could plot now to pass another driver 3 or 4 laps later. His thinking, his strategies, his mind, all of Denny unfolded for me that day. After a cool-down lap, we pulled into the paddock, and the entire crew was waiting. They surrounded the car, and their hands released me from my harness, and I leapt to the ground. "Did you like it?" "Yes," I barked and jumped up in the air. "You were really moving out there," Pat said to Denny. "We got a real racer on the set." "Well, Enzo barked twice," Denny explained with a laugh. 2 barks meant faster. They laughed, and I barked twice again, faster. The feeling, the sensation, the movement, the speed, the cars, the tires, the sound, the wind, the track surface, the exit, the shift point, the braking zone, the ride. It's all about the ride. I floated through the rest of our trip. I dreamed of going out again at speed, but I suspected that one more track time for me was unlikely. Still, I had my memory, my experience I could relive in my mind again and again. 2 barks meant faster. Sometimes to this day in my sleep, I bark twice because I'm dreaming of Denny driving me around Thunder Hill, and I bark twice to say faster. One more lap, Denny. Faster.